would change. I hope that is as much as I can tell you. The second question, I'm sorry, Louise?
Bid costs.
Reimbursement, bid costs.
Bid costs. Oh, okay. I do know our Minister for Water has said that the government will consider some reimbursement of bid costs for the losing bidder. To my knowledge, there is no firm decision on how or what number that would be. It's not necessarily unusual. There are previous examples where that has occurred, but from my memory it's occurred, and I think the same thing's likely to apply here, although government hasn't taken that decision yet. It's likely to occur where we've asked a bidder to undertake work that was outside the original request for tender, or that went beyond the original process that we might have established. Which was, I can give you one example that occurred in Eastlink, where the losing bidder was awarded some reimbursement of and probably a relatively small percentage of their costs, because we decided through the process that there was greater value for money in the state in taking those two bidders right through to contract signing, rather than going to a preferred bidder at an earlier stage. So government took the decision that even with the payment of some bid costs to the losing bidder, the value for money that we would achieve by maintaining that competition for a longer period of time was a net benefit to Victorian taxpayers. So no decision yet on diesel, but I expect they're the sort of parameters that would be considered.
Next question.
Peter Doyle from Mallisons. I've got two questions, if I may. One for John and one for David Roseman. For John, the question I was interested in asking was the state of Victoria, I think, has shown now a long-standing and quite a deep commitment to the PPP model. I'd be interested in your observations about what internally within government is important to get that level of commitment, and what's driven the impetus in Victoria to stick with the PPP model even during difficult times, such as we've had recently, but the government has pressed on with the desal plant. And I think that's quite a notable achievement in the circumstances. So I'd just be interested to hear your comments about sort of the culture that exists and what's worked well in Victoria. And then if I could ask David Roseman a question just about on the funding side, do you see there being a problem in the market, for example, if there were two large projects to come to the market at the same time in terms of a capacity constraint on funding, or do you think the market would sort that out? And I guess the second part of that question is, how important do you see a bond market returning being, for the ongoing development of PPP projects?
Okay. Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay.
Give John a break.
Yeah, give John a break. Look, I think it's a good question as to the quantum of funding and how governments approach transactions. There are a couple of large transactions that are sort of in various stages of the market. Here in Australia, you've got the Royal Adelaide Hospital, which has gone to expression of interest, which is a large transaction. You've got the Sydney Metro, which again has gone to expressions of interest, and you've got potentially others down the track as well. Very, very difficult. As John sort of said as well, there are clearly a lot of financiers have departed. We certainly struggle more today than we did in terms of actually attracting people to come on the journey and bid these transactions, full stop, regardless of the amount. The processes take 12, 18 months to bid. So it's a long time, and if you've got to pick the winner as well, so you tie yourself to a consortium, you're a financier, you're going to lend $100 or $200 million to a deal, and you've got to make a call 18 months out, spend 18 months bidding this thing, and then you may win or lose. Quite hard to attract people. I think it comes down also to the number of people who are taken through to the shortlist at the final stages. We had 2 on desal. There's always a debate in government, should it be 2 or 3 if there is 3? Sometimes there's not that option, and I think that's a very important debate to have. I mean, our clear view in this market is that it's much more sensible to have two. I don't think there's any evidence in bids in Australia that having two bids hasn't led to a very, very competitive outcome. And in the market today with large transactions, spreading yourself over three will do two things. One, it'll make it nigh on impossible for any of the bidders to actually get all the finance if it's a large transaction. But more importantly, it will actually discourage people from participating in the transaction, in the bids, full stop. Because when you're one of three, I think that would swing the equation for a lot of financiers to say, we're not going to be involved in this bid until the end of the process. So that gives no one the certainty that they require. So I think that the issues are sort of intertwined into that and will be tested. The bond market is extremely important, really, in terms of driving that decision because of the competition to the bank market that it provides. And we had, in the good old days of 2 or 3 years ago, the bond market could be a viable alternative to the whole bank market, and it was only a question of the pricing differential. So you knew you could go to both markets. The competition was in the pricing. So whether you paid 70 basis points or 75 basis points was the call. That call was sort of a nonsense today. It's whether you can get the money or not. But certainly coming back at all to provide an alternative would be critical in all that sort of stuff.
John?
Your other question, I guess I'm always a little intrigued by the amount of debate around PPPs in a way, in the 21st century, because if we take Victoria and why is the Victorian government actually still persisting with the model, and as some people would put it, we could go back to the Kennett government that that yes did deliver CityLink and some number of privately operated hospitals and prisons, etc. So it was a reform model of procurement, which is so you don't have a government that reforms the way you do something and the next government that comes in and says, well, because I'm different, I'm not going to continue the reforms. And I think it's been a continual reform process in Victoria. So Victoria has been in the PPP space for near on 20 years. It's not something that everybody just thought of yesterday. So I sort of do question why we're still sort of arguing. I know, it's private sector investment, and you do have to measure value for money, but that goes to the other reason why it's still a strong procurement method in Victoria, because we are achieving value for money outcomes against our best efforts to develop a benchmark, which is the public sector comparator, which is one measure of value for money. The second measure is measure it against other forms of procurement, and we're now seeing some both Australian and national studies that are doing that. There's been 2 in Australia in the last 12 months, which clearly demonstrates a much better performance of PPPs through to the end of construction. I think where we are now, the next measurement of value for money needs to be valuing the services. Now, this is a lot more difficult, and there's some of this work now being undertaken in the UK, and often it's sort of qualitative judgment rather than quantitative, but we should start comparing the level and quality of service that we're seeing in PPP hospitals in terms of the facilities management or the soft FM components, and compare it with how we're managing publicly owned hospitals. Because these are 30-year contracts. All we've managed to measure yet is the first 3 or 4 years. So, I think there is no other reason other than emerging evidence that PPPs are offering good value for money, have been for 20 years or close to in Victoria, and I think based on that we'll see a continuation of the model.
As an outsider from Sydney looking in on Melbourne, I suspect there's another reason, and it's difficult to argue cause and effect, but Victoria has a major projects group down there that's very skilled, very competent, and are used to asking those tough procurement questions and taking projects through from initial stages right through to delivery. And I think that's sort of lacking in New South Wales. We seem to try and, apart from when we had a very dedicated group in the RTA that were churning motorways out